So Halloween is rapidly approaching, and I couldn't in good conscience do a month on random Halloween-themed classics without talking about something that a good chunk of us no doubt grew up with in one form or another. The Halloween TV special. Whether it's The Simpsons' Treehouse of Horror, TV specials like Witch's Night Out or Attack of the Jack-O'-Lanterns, or full-blown TV movies, the Halloween special is a staple of the season. While here in the UK these specials were quite few and far between at first, by the late 90s most of the kids' channels were on board with Halloween specials. At least in principle. CITV would run episodes of Wolves, Witches and Giants and Grisly Tales for Gruesome Kids, two shows I really need to talk about someday. Nickelodeon would show episodes of Sabrina the Teenage Witch and, in later years, Invader Zim. And Fox Kids would pretty much become the home of Goosebumps. But there was one channel that eluded most of the UK, and that was the Disney Channel's Halloween lineup. Disney in the UK was behind pay-per-view. That means, unless you had a family that could afford those channels, they were encrypted, barring tantalising free preview weeks, where the channels would be unlocked to the public. A devious scheme, if you ask me, that helped drive kids into a mad frenzy that they could watch for 1 week only and then never see the likes of Timo Supremo, The Weekenders and Fillmore. Actually, Fillmore was pretty good. Go watch Fillmore sometime, it's surprisingly good. A Disney Halloween was a bit of a different beast to the other channels. Whereas Cartoon Network or Nick may rustle up 1 or 2 movies, Disney would not only show dozens of films a week, they'd make new ones specifically for Halloween. Some were great, like Halloween Town and Hocus Pocus. Others, well, there's Twitches and Girl vs. Monster. But in the late 90s, Disney would release a Halloween TV movie that would go down as one of the most complained about and scary specials to ever air on the channel. Don't Look Under the Bed was Disney's 1999 made-for-TV Halloween movie. And while it isn't set at Halloween itself, if I hadn't told you that it wasn't set at Halloween, you'd have never have guessed it. The film was directed by Kenneth Johnson, who was probably best known for having written most of, if not all of, V, the series. He's also allegedly credited for having created the Bionic Woman spin-off series. In terms of direction credits, well, there's some, but nothing majorly of note. He did direct a few episodes of V, and his biggest credit's probably Short Circuit 2. But that's about it in terms of things of note. So I wasn't too worried about going into this one with him at the helm. He's had experience of shooting weird and scary stuff, so I felt he was pretty much the one to have if you wanted a safe pair of hands. On the same note, the script was written by Mark Edward Edens, whose writing credits run into the dozens, with credits mainly for children's cartoons such as the 90s X-Men series and a couple of episodes of the original Ninja Turtles. Bizarrely, he's also credited as having written additional dialogue for The Prowler, which stands out in this sea of cartoons and live-action kids shows as just something really odd for this guy to have on his credits list. I mean, everyone has to start somewhere, but still. So we have a pretty confident director and a more than capable writer on board, but what's it all about? Well, Don't Look Under the Bed follows the misadventures of Frances, a 14-year-old, somewhat grounded young girl, played by a then 20-year-old Erin Chambers. I know, right? Mad. Who's somewhat meandering through life in a hometown of Middleburg. That is until one day when the entire family is woken up at what they think is 6:30 in the morning only for it to be revealed that all the clocks in the house have in fact been set forward and it's actually 4:30 in the morning. Thinking that this is a bit odd, the family shrug it off and go about their business. But when Frances goes to school later that day, she finds out that far from it just being an oddity at her house exclusively, the entire town also had their clocks all set back 2 hours. Soon, other strange happenings start occurring in the town of Middleburg. All the eggs in the city disappear, only to end up smashed all over Frances's favourite teacher's car. Swimming pools start randomly turning into gelatin. The principal's office suddenly erupts into a swarm of bees, not to mention the random citywide power outages. It's around this time that Frances meets a mysterious stranger called Larry Houdini, a hyperactive and bizarre figure who can do whatever he wants and seemingly goes unnoticed. It's then later revealed that Larry is in fact imaginary. Frances has inherited Larry off of a younger brother, and this for me is where the film very much went away from the typical Disney mould. See, Frances's brother had leukemia and he was going to die. Larry was his imaginary friend before he went in for a marrow transplant, but Frances forced her brother to believe more in the doctors than in his imaginary friends, and as a result Larry became abandoned. It was only by chance that he managed to latch on to Frances, but when imaginary friends are separated from their best buddy before they naturally grow out of having imaginary friends, they begin to transform into horrific and nightmarish versions of themselves called the Boogeyman. No, not that kind of boogeyman. Rather than killing and murdering, these boogeymen exist purely to cause mischief, mayhem, and, in a rather dark turn, kidnapping children in order to feed off the residual imagination energy. Larry reveals to Frances that she has a boogeyman living under her bed, and that the pair need to act fast in order to take him out before he ruins the town of Middleburg forever. All the while, Frances's parents grow more and more concerned about their daughter's erratic behaviour. They believe that she's responsible for all of the boogeyman's pranks, and the town at large turn on her, thus creating a race against time to find and stop the boogeyman before Larry fully transforms and Frances gets locked up somewhere and the key thrown away forever. I really had to dampen down my expectations for this one going into it. I first found out about this movie from one of these list websites that feature the top 10 scariest kids' Halloween movies ever. And this was in the top 3 as one of the scariest kids' films ever broadcast. Add into that the mild hysteria that allegedly occurred when this was initially broadcast, in which dozens of parents complained that the film was too scary for their kids. It sets a pretty strong reputation right out of the gate. So going into this, I had to pretty much remind myself that I wasn't going into a screening of The Exorcist or Antichrist here, and that ultimately it was, and still is, just a kids' movie. Personally, I consider Are You Afraid of the Dark to be the high watermark of kids' horror, with some moments in that series easily rivaling some adult horror movies from the day. So how was Don't Look Under the Bed? Well, a bit of a mixed bag in all honesty. But only to me personally, I should stress. This film has a lot of good things going for it. Really, it does. The only hang-ups I have with it are personal gripes and things that just weren't my cup of tea. First and foremost, the direction's pretty up to scratch for a TV movie of this time. In the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, TV movies kind of went through a strange transformation, whereby the physical quality of the movies increased, but the style was a kind of halfway house between a UK soap opera and a full-blown feature film. After the mid-2000s, TV movies pretty much went full film in terms of their style, but there was a lot of soul-searching in the 80s and 90s to find out exactly what a TV movie should look like. And this film, having come out in 1999, slap bang through the middle of this transition, looks about as good as a film from this time can look. It has a quite unnerving style about it, and the whole thing holds up as a piece of spooky filmmaking. Johnson does a great job of trying to get the most out of his cast in this, and the whole thing feels like a genuinely solid work. There wasn't really any moments with this film where I was sat groaning at the direction. It is what it is. Nothing dramatically special, but nothing underwhelming. The cinematography, however, is frankly quite impressive. The mix of shot types and creative use of colour, lighting and composition really made this film stand out in my mind. From even the opening few minutes of this film, when we're treated to a tracking sweep shot through Middleburg using Evil Dead vision, you just know that the cinematographer on this production has fully intended to make this Disney movie as scary as he's permitted to do. And they really go to town on it. There's loads of crashing Dutch angles, subtle shots where inanimate objects are moving in the background, close-ups of Larry's transformation appearance, and plenty of weird and strange shots scattered throughout this movie. And only increasing the great look of this film is the shadowy lighting and use of colour that really helps add definition to proceedings. Particularly the use of purples, pale blues and oranges. It has all the feeling of a Halloween movie without ever having to mention Halloween. And because of that, it really does look the part of being a proper Halloween kids movie. And I think it's one of the better examples I've seen where the language of a film hasn't been watered down just because this is a movie for kids. It cracks on, and I wouldn't have been embarrassed at all had the same Cine been used in a full-blown legitimate adult horror movie. There's a real keen eye involved in this one. Working quite nicely alongside the Cine, the effects here were also surprisingly well handled. Larry's transformation scenes into the Boogeyman are genuinely eerie, and I could easily see why kids would be traumatised by some of the shots in this movie. They also use CG quite well here. It never feels obvious or out of place, and when it is used, it's usually just to smooth over transitions in scenes, which again helps keep the audience well in on the action without being too prominent. The props are also quite well constructed, with Larry's Boogeyman aging device looking like something out of an episode of Doctor Who, and the Boogeyman himself looking perfectly eerie and unnatural. They do a really good job here. I should also say that the acting is just about right for this kind of film. It does rather feel a bit sanitised in the way most Disney TV movies do, but because of the dark subjects this film talks about, it works very much in the movie's favour. Everyone in this film, with the exception of the main core cast, are smiley Disney caricatures. So when you contrast this with the Boogeyman's arrival, or the scenes where Francis is being wrangled into seeing psychiatric help, it's all a bit uncomfortable and creepy in its own way. Kind of a forced melodramatic happiness. It almost strays into Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared territory at one point or another. Both Erin Chambers and Ty Hodges are great as Larry and Francis. I think they both understood exactly what the director wanted from them, and they gave a performance that's perfectly reflective of that. I'm not saying they give a great performance, but they do exactly what the characters need to make the film go the way it needs to. So that to me is another big success. On a final positive note, I also have to say that the soundtracks are really solid work as well. There are a few stings of Larry goofing about that are a little overly in your face, but for the most part it's really solid, well crafted and well utilised. It gets you hooked just when you need to be hooked. This movie's pacing allows for a slow burning spookiness that feels just about right for the tone they're setting off with. So yeah, it's pretty commendable. Not necessarily an OST I'd go out of my way to get my hands on, but it's tonally totally atmospheric and appropriate enough for this feature. The only issue I had with this film ultimately, and I really cannot stress enough that this is just a personal issue and not something that I can say is a problem everyone who watches this will share, is that the script just didn't do it for me. The dialogue isn't the strongest in the world. To be honest, at some points it's just plain awkward. There's no lines that genuinely stand out to me as quotable or memorable. The film's happy to just plod along, and while there are some memorable scenes in this feature, the dialogue just feels like it's working through the motions. Maybe had they toned down Larry a little bit and played up Francis, or Francis's friend Joe, who literally only turns up 2 or 3 times in this film, they probably could have fleshed out the characters a bit more and given them a lot more depth. The imaginary friend angle is a really good one to pursue, but they seem to have gone down the drop-dead Fred route, and while I love how they handle imaginary friends in Fred, as these irritating and annoying figures who are ultimately lovable and remind you that it's okay to be a kid sometimes, Larry in Don't Look Under the Bed is just irritating. We don't spend enough time with him being reasonable to really appreciate him, and they make it very clear from the beginning that Francis has just inherited Larry from her younger brother. As a result, we spend the first act of the film thinking Larry is some weird stalker prankster type, the second act being irritated and wound up by him doing his best Rick Mayall impression, and the entire third act still being wound up with him till the last 10 to 15 minutes, when the film clunk shifts into an out-of-nowhere, heart-of-the-card style friendship is forever angle, followed immediately by an out-of-left-field romance angle, followed then again immediately by a family is love angle. Seriously, the last 10 to 15 minutes of this film is totally confusing and a real mess of mixed messages and half ideas that just really didn't work for me. I think in terms of basic story, they have a more than fine idea. I love the idea that neglected imaginary friends go on to become the creatures that live under the bed. That's a great idea. And I thought it was incredibly brave of the scriptwriter in Disney to run with a plot that predominantly revolves around a young boy slowly dying of cancer being forced to give up his best friend in order to focus on his treatment. They could have maybe have explored that a little bit more, but hey, it's Disney in the 90s talking about kids with cancer. It's pretty much unheard of for Disney to do that in 2018, let alone 1999. I don't know, to me it's all a bit too little too late. The first 2 acts feel like I'm watching the opening of an episode of Goosebumps or The Secret Life of Alex Mack, but the third act jolts into its own unique vibe and tone that I really got on board with. It's just a shame that the last 10 minutes or so try so desperately to round the film off in a way that's both happy, sad, romance-fueled and open for the possibility of a sequel. They really try to do way too much for the ending of this film, and as a result it just comes across as rushed, badly timed and ill-motivated. Not to say that this is a bad movie because of the script. The points I mentioned above are just personal gripes, issues with the structure and pacing that only people who are interested in that kind of thing would genuinely really care about. But the script just wasn't my cup of tea. It doesn't mean that kids or grown-ups alike won't enjoy this film, but I couldn't talk about it without acknowledging its faults. All in all, while this wasn't my kind of thing, I wholeheartedly recommend it if you have kids. This is a fantastic introductory movie for kids who aren't old enough to watch grown-up horror movies, but still want to feel like they're watching something grown-up and spooky. Younger kids may struggle with this one, as I think there is a little bit of dead weight in the first 2 acts, and some of it may genuinely be a bit scary for them. But if you have a 6 to 10-year-old lolling around the house with nothing better to do, I think this may be a pretty good investment of your time. With good solid direction and cine, good effects, and a story that's able to hold your attention for 90 minutes or so, While it may not be perfect in my opinion, I'm sure it'll liven up your kids' Halloween.